Good afternoon. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Gail, for inviting me here today. I hope my voice lasts after 18 months in lockdown, only speaking to a small screen. I found my voice started to struggle talking over the hum of chatter over coffee and breakfast this morning and generally there. So hopefully my voice will last out for the next 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to talk today about the outlook for high-impact exploration in Africa. But in many ways, the world is now very different from the last time we met about 2 years ago. I think for me, in many ways, 2020 was something of a watershed for exploration globally. We've been privileged enough during our work with Westwood over the last few months in particular to have some great conversations with some of the leaders of the biggest explorers on the planet and be able to kind of have a very open dialogue with what's on their minds, how they see the world changing, what that might mean for their own activity sets, and generally for the exploration landscape globally. So although the theme of the talk today is the outlook for high-impact exploration in Africa, I think many of the themes are probably appropriate to high-impact exploration globally, but with a few local nuances for what might we see in Africa in particular. So press this button here. So what I'm going to talk about today is first of all, put Africa into a global context. We're going to look back at briefly at high-impact exploration over the last 10 years. We'll then split it into two 5-year periods. And it very much is a game of two halves, if you like, with the high oil price period from 2011 to 2015, and then 2016 to 2020. Then perhaps giving something away there, the question, what went wrong in Africa? So there may be a clue there that something maybe didn't go quite right in terms of activity and performance. But also what went right. And we'll pull on some examples of what has been going wrong, but also what's been right. Some great messages for what has been done recently in Africa, and what might be some indications of what the future might hold for us. We'll then go ahead and look at the planned high-impact drilling. I think we've heard many references to that this morning anyway, so just kind of be a recap of what we've heard so far. And then finish off now with what we see the outlook for high-impact exploration being in Africa, but again with a mindset about some of these maybe messages which we can hold globally at the same time. So looking back at the period from 2011 to 2020, you can see that over 1,000 high-impact wells were drilled globally. Now we in Westwood call a high-impact well one which has a someone take that call. A pre-drill target of more than 100 million barrels or 1 TCF, or as a frontier well, or indeed may have found more than 100 million barrels as a result of that. So more than 1,000 of those wells were drilled. And you can see that Africa took a very healthy share of about 25% of the global portfolio in that period. Pretty good. In terms of performance, around about 130 billion BOE of oil and gas was found across the industry by high-impact exploration. And again, Africa took about 29% of that, so very respectable performance going through there over that 10-year period. But then if we look back now and start to compare, again, the 5-year periods of 2011 to 2016, remember when the oil price is pretty high, and then looking forward to the 2016 to 2020 period when the oil price had dropped and we've been living in this kind of, quote, lower for longer period. Then what you can see is that globally, high-impact exploration drilling dropped by about 46%. However, in Africa, it dropped by 76%, a very disproportionate drop there. You can see, looking through region by region through here, you can see a drop in activity, modest drops in North America, in South America, in Europe. Some lower figures from the Middle East and Russia. I think one pointed there is we don't have actually complete visibility of high-impact exploration in the Middle East and in Russia in particular, and probably ditto in what's going on in the Far East and China in particular. So don't quite believe the numbers to the right-hand side of the chart, the upper chart quite so much through there, but the figures for Africa really are real, and they really show this disproportionate drop in activity in that period. But then you look at performance as well, and again you can see a slight uptick in exploration performance in North America, a slight drop in South America. That was the switch from Brazil being drilled out in the big time into Guyana coming through in the 2016 period. Small numbers in Europe, as you might expect, but again a massive disproportionate drop in discovered volumes in Africa. Again, a message on an increase in discovered volumes coming through in Russia and the Middle East, which is perhaps a theme for another talk, and then lower volumes in the Far East. But a drop in activity and a significant drop in performance over those two 5-year periods. So what went wrong? Well, I guess, first of all, something about frontier exploration. Now, over the period, I think we saw about 150 frontier wells drilled across Africa in 37 different basins. We made about 54 discoveries, that's technical and commercial discoveries, which gives us a 36% technical success rate, which is not bad. Commercial success rate was about 6%. We see about 9 commercial frontier discoveries in that time. 6% is slightly below the global average of 8%, but it's not a real shock. But of those 9 commercial discoveries, what we've seen now is 2 of them in production, 2 now post-FID, and 5 are still waiting to be commercialized. Underneath on the chart there, you can see the level of frontier exploration drilling activity over the period from 2007, highlighting the discoveries that were made. Back from 2007, with the first one was Jubilee, obviously. I can't read my own slides from here without, but I'm sure you can read the rest of them. But you can see post-2016, the level of frontier activity has dropped significantly, and the only real significant frontier discovery was in the Eastern Eagle Basin with Broadpadder in 2019. Interesting, we'll come to that at the end, but we're seeing probably the highest level of exploration frontier activity coming through in 2020, which is perhaps one of the good news messages to close with. So, disappointing frontier exploration activity, but not kind of that bad in terms of a global context, but certainly you can see the ramp up in activity and then the significant drop. So that's really the question, part of the question, what was going on there and what's driving that activity and change in performance. Well, again, now looking at Africa in particular, looking at the relevance of oil and gas being found through our frontier exploration programs, and then thinking back about how that relates globally. Then if you look at the big red blobs here representing the gas found from frontier exploration and green representing oil, then oil frontier exploration has been quite disappointing. I think everyone knows that. The big gas discoveries have been as a result of people looking for oil. I think, in MSGBC, people were looking for an oil play initially, finally said, okay, it's not going to be liquids. Let's get lucky, and luckily we found some big gas. Similar story in East Africa as well. So looking for liquids in the first place, but coming out with big gas in the end. Perhaps a similar message coming out in Eastern Eagle in South Africa as well, where what was initially hoped to be an oil play is now, if you read between the lines, the releases that are being said, I think the verdict is that it's going to be gas if it's going to work, and some interesting thoughts about what that might mean for Impact's portfolio around the rest of the margin later on in the year and the next year or two ahead. So looking for oil and found lots of gas. And then the chart now looks at what's been happening to the discoveries globally, again by region, in terms of oil and gas over the period. And what you can see again is that much of the proportion is that the solid colours represent the oil which is now progressing, and the hash colours represent oil oil and gas which we're seeing as being stalled, i.e. having limited activity in both appraisal or progression to FID over the period. So we're saying, well, maybe this is going to be left on the shelf. Maybe it's something we should be. It is at risk in terms of monetization. So no new oil plays in Africa have been bigger than 2.5 billion barrels over the period. Now that again is something which has reference globally as well. If we look at global frontier exploration over the last 10 years or so, what we see is that globally only one oil play has come in to be more than 2.5 billion barrels, and that's the Liza play in Guyana. Compared to gas, now gas plays, again dominated by what we see through in Africa, have been bigger, but perhaps with a shorter lifetime to them. People have been stopping exploration for gas after a smaller number of wells. But generally, I think in terms of frontier exploration for oil, what we're seeing now is that the success rates are pretty low, 6 to 8% globally for frontier exploration overall. And the size of the prize to be had by frontier exploration for liquids is more modest now than it has been in the past. So often people have been looking for frontier exploration, not for the frontier discovery itself, but for the upside it offers you once you go into the emerging stage, when you're steep on the creaming curve, the high volumes are being found, high success rates, things are great opportunity to be had. So that period now in the emerging stage is looking a lot smaller, and the ultimate prize to be had by frontier exploration for liquids is probably a lot smaller than it was in the past. So a message for people there that are coming out saying we're going to look for the next multi-billion barrel play, those have been very, very few and far between since Liza, and before that the 2P play in Brazil. So of the volume that's been found in Africa over the period between 2007 and 2016, then about 50% of that, 58% of that we can consider as being stalled. It's not gone to FID, we've seen no appraisal activity on that, and therefore it's certainly a risk of what you're going to do with it, and that is obviously dominantly gas. Now, one of the reasons for that is obviously, and there's been some great conversation this morning about the gas infrastructure in Africa, a fabulous presentation from Wentworth on gas in Tanzania, which is really interesting to me, and also some different view perhaps from Seplat about what's happening for gas in Nigeria. And I think that's an insight to what might be happening with the market for gas in Africa, is the market, the need for gas is there, but perhaps the market and the active demand is not there just yet. So one of the biggest problems for gas monetization is the lack of infrastructure at scale for gas developments. So another thing about what went wrong, perhaps, is onshore exploration. And again, I think everyone knows that the big discoveries in Lake Albert and Lockachar have been slow to get to FID. Again, big hopes made from back in the early 2000s, but still no sign of FID. Although, again, as Keith Hill said this morning, progress is being made, and that's been pushed by Africa Oil and by Tullow at the moment. Maybe we can see line of sight to development in Lockachar at last. But again, that's some indication that, again, there's a question this morning about kind of do you prefer to explore offshore or onshore? I think the answer was well, it depends. Each one should be taken on its own merits. Typically, onshore exploration is cheap, but monetization of onshore developments is slow and complicated compared to offshore deep water exploration, where, fine, it's more expensive to start with, but these days now the challenge of deep water has been resolved. We can just bring in an FPSO and it can be monetized very quickly, as I'll mention later on. Okay, so what went right? And this is what went right with a question mark in the first example through here is Utonica. Again, a nice frontier discovery coming through in 2019 with a good follow-on at Leopard the next year. Things are looking good. Again, perhaps disappointed with the phase. It's come out to be a little more gas and condensate than was initially hoped for. But again, there's something about the scale of this of the discovery that's been made and what's going to happen to that. So great in terms of finding a nice frontier discovery. But again, if you look at the way that the gas can be monetized through here, then the existing market in South Africa is quite limited. You're 175 kilometres of the coast, and there's a GTL plant available to take some of the gas. Other options being talked about are taking the gas along the coastline to Port Elizabeth. But again, the scale of what has been found is probably too much for what the local market can take. So again, the complication there is it's a nice problem to have, but have we found too much gas? It's great to find nice small volumes for local distribution networks in the countries where you find them, but finding too much at the moment without the infrastructure for large-scale gas developments and power supply is really a challenge for monetization of gas in Africa. Again, what went right? I'm going to give some indications about who my vote for the frontier legend might be in the next two slides, so forgive me on that one. But again, one of the messages we're hearing from companies as we speak to them at the moment is a move away from frontier exploration. And I think we're seeing that as kind of low success rates, low liquid volumes in particular coming through. Another one is the growth of ILX. I think more and more companies are now saying they want to retrench into some kind of heartlands and monetize discoveries near existing infrastructure, can be brought on very quickly, reasonable volumes and high value. I think Block 1506 in Angola is a fabulous example of where Eni have really done a really great job in doing some real class act ILX exploration. Block 1506 was taken as a part of Block 15, which was held by Exxon previously, where they'd taken about a $4.5 billion development through to FID and production. But since Eni picked up the block in 2006, they found about nearly 2 billion barrels of BOE from ILX, which is not the kind of numbers you'd normally associate with ILX, which is typically 10, 20 million barrels here and there. And not only are they finding significant volumes, but they're also bringing them on stream very, very quickly. Really smart plans for putting the infrastructure in place, exploring near those hubs and getting them on stream very quickly. Agogo on stream in less than 9 months, and Quica, we discovered earlier this year, just less than high impact, but about 90 million barrels we carry for that, on stream in less than 4 months. So ILX can offer some significant opportunities for the companies if they're in the right place, if they've got the right infrastructure, and if they apply the right technology to really unlock the value that can be had from ILX. And the next slide again, which is going to give away my vote for Luca, is what's the recent news coming out of CDI. So Baleine, again, this was really, for me, a masterclass in exploration. Vanco presented the Baleine prospect, we think, in 2007 at an APE conference in Houston. The line on the right-hand side of the map comes from the presentation that they gave. Then it kind of went away. Lukoil had the block, or they bought Vanco and relinquished it. It went away for a while. Then Eni picked it up. They picked up Block 101, where the well was drilled. And then we only heard about the well being drilled as it was 2 days away from being completed and announced. So they kept it very, very tight because they were, in the background, acquiring the block next door, where the largest part of the prospect was seen. They did a behind-the-scenes negotiation with the government through there, got the block, made the discovery. Now they're in a great place to praise the upside for it. And this is now, again, the biggest discovery since Jubilee, and certainly that was the largest discovery in the town of Basin since Jubilee. We carry about 420 million barrels on this one. So a very, very major, high-impact discovery, shows what can be done with the right kind of approach to exploration. And now this prospect, again, it's been on people's books for probably nearly 20 years. So there are these opportunities out there if we can find them, if we can get access to the right acreage, do the right stuff, drill them, and make it work. So my vote goes for Luca. Okay, and now let's look at some of the status of FIDs going from Africa. So of the 117 high-impact discoveries made in Africa over the period, about 51 billion has been discovered. 44 billion is gas, 24 is what we see as being at risk. Now what I've got through here is colouring in the pie chart. The solid colours represent gas, the hash colours represent oil through here. On the left-hand side is the volume that's been sanctioned. The numbers are in BOE, billion BOE, sanction expected in the next line of sight of the next 2 or 3 years. Then we've got volumes which are seen by us as being non-commercial, some big volumes there which we just say non-commercial, it's just not going to happen. And also volume which are still, quote, under appraisal. So nothing much is happening with them, but there are indications of words saying, yes, we haven't given up on this yet, it will happen. So you can see that nearly 50% is at risk of the volume found in Africa over the period. You look at the middle pie chart now here, just for interest, is how these developments are being made. And you can see the lion's share of the developments are about FPSOs and tiebacks. So again, offshore is good. I think the deep water is now easy. You can bring in an FPSO. The FPSO market is very buoyant at the moment. There are plenty around. They can be brought in, plugged in, and produced very, very quickly. Then on the right-hand side, this is an interesting indication about the equity taken in the FIDs and what we think are the expected sanctions over the next couple of years by different company peer groups. And you can see that 76% of the equity in FIDs is currently being taken by the super majors at nearly half and by the NOCs. Now, the NOCs here is not just the domestic NOCs who are getting some kind of carry or paying their cost within the country where the discoveries are made, but also a growing trend which we see for exploration globally is that the super majors and the NOCs, the international NOCs, and this is dominated by companies like CNOOC, who we heard from this morning, from QP and from Petronas, the big players in that space, but many other of the less obvious NOCs are also now getting more and more active into international exploration. The obvious ones in here, in the international NOCs, are Rosneft and the other one, CNPC, are both active in Africa. So again, the question for some great conversation this morning about the appetite for high-impact exploration from the independents, and clearly some big appetite for that for a smaller number of companies. But the facts say that the largest equity share in both high-impact exploration and high-impact FIDs in Africa is the NOCs and the super majors. So planned high-impact activity, I think, again, flashing back to the previous numbers, things are picking up. And now we can see something like 8 high-impact exploration tests being drilled in Africa in 2021. So far, we've seen Barracuda and Baleine. I've already mentioned Barracuda, drilled by Total in CDI. Probably disappointing is what we'd probably say, although nothing's been said about it. And then planned frontier wells, again, these have been mentioned by the operators and the partners earlier on today, Venus, Jove Marine, Gazania, and Graf coming through. And then some big high-impact wells on Java and Bambo significantly. So some great wells to be seen through the rest of this year, and perhaps I think these are the ones we have firmly in 2021, and some good ones also being drilled in 2022 as well. So now this is probably putting Africa back on the international spotlight for high-impact exploration, which is really good. But the question is, what does this mean for the longer term? So frontier success, again, is something to be really thought about. Again, the appetite for frontier exploration is generally thought to be going away. We're seeing some great tests being drilled this year, but statistically, 6% chance of success, 8% globally, and the chance of opening up a multi-billion barrel oil play are quite slim. So let's say one of these might work. That's great. That's going to open up some more running room for some emerging play exploration in that play, hopefully with time. But generally, I think this could be the last wave of frontier exploration wells being drilled, not only in Africa, potentially globally as well. So all fingers crossed for what's going to happen over the next 6 to 18 months. ILX, again, ILX is a growing theme from the super majors that we hear from everybody we speak to is people want to do more ILX. How do we do it? What are the keys to success in ILX? And again, what Eni have been doing in 1506 really is a class act, and that shows what can be done on ILX if you have got the I to do the X first of all, and obviously if the potential is going to be there. So that's, again, one to watch. And the question can be, I think, for Africa, can that kind of level of ILX success be repeated in the other countries which we talked about today? In Ghana has been mentioned, CDI, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. In terms of the energy transition, well, I think, that again, there's been more and more comment about the impact of the energy transition on high-impact exploration, more thought about carbon emissions, about cycle times, about break-even costs. And more scrutiny will be put on both exploration opportunities before they're chosen to be drilled and also in the FIDs which go forward. So again, looking at the volumes which we see being potentially at risk, I think given that they've been perhaps on the shelf for a while already, if they can't move forward very quickly, they are certainly at risk of being stranded, potentially forever. Again, fourth point now, high-impact activity is increasingly being dominated by the super majors and the NOCs. A nice opportunity for the mid-caps coming through where they choose to do that. But one of the questions we have been asking is, and there's some examples around Africa about this, is it's great the money is there for the small companies, the independents, to raise a few tens of millions for exploration. But the nice problem to have is if they have got a big discovery comes in, where will the hundreds of millions come from for development? The market perhaps for the potential, historically the IOCs, where they wanted to come in and perhaps buy equity in discoveries from the smaller companies in the past, with the appetite for big investments in long cycle exploration coming, perhaps declining by the big IOCs, where will that come from? And that's perhaps a question for the audience who know more about it than I do for the funding for independent activity. And the final point here, again, bringing gas to market is rather than export it away from Africa, which seems a real shame to me to stick the gas you found on a LNG ship and take it to China. Really need to think about reinvesting that gas into Africa by development of the infrastructure at scale to bring it to the people who, I think, as Wentworth mentioned, the people in the villages that need to have electricity, heating, light, and gas could really be the transition fuel to help bring that to the people in Africa. The question is who's going to do that, perhaps. Thank you. That's all I've got.